It is truly a delight to be here at this annual function of Tughlaq. Though I am sorry, I cannot speak to you in Tamil, and therefore I would have preferred if there was someone to interpret what I say in Tamil. And if I have an interpreter who is like Cho, then I would say that the translation would be far, far better than the original speech.
அதாவது அவர் என்ன சொல்றாருன்னா, அவர் சொன்னதை நான் சொல்ல போறது இல்லைன்றார். இப்படி ஒரு நம்பிக்கையுடன் அவர் ஆரம்பிக்கிறார். He has no faith in me. That is why he says that what I am going to speak is not what he speaks.
No, I can, after listening to him, as interpreted to me by Guru Murthy, Narendra Bhai was being told, translated by our LG, Ganeshan. And so both of us were enjoying the Tamil speech. And therefore it is that I always feel, when I go to areas like, say, Kerala or Tamil Nadu, or sometimes even the interior parts of Karnataka and Andhra, or some other areas also, the interior, and I am forced to speak in English or in Hindi, then I insist on the translation being done in the local language. But in this case, I was told that so far as the audience of the Tughlaq is concerned, those who come here, they will not need any translation. I know that. But the most educated audiences also would understand something in Tamil far more effectively than in English or Hindi. But it entirely depends on Cho. He's a close friend. I leave it to him.
Sir, I feel I should not interrupt your speech with my translation and spoil the flow of it. I am sure the audience present here will understand every word that you say.
I leave it to you. He has abandoned me, find you, even though he's a very close friend since a long time. And if I feel delighted to be here, one reason is that Cho has been a very dear friend for a long time. And so when this time he told me that you had come earlier, Narendra Bhai had also come once earlier, I would like both of you to come together. I said nothing like it. Friends, first of all, I inquired from Guru Murthy whether this annual function of Tughlaq is held always on Pongal Day, and he said yes. It was founded on Pongal. So first of all, let me greet you all. Pongal greetings. It's after all a day which is observed with different names throughout the country. I have been a resident for the first 20 years of my life in Sindh, Karachi. And there we called it Uttarayan. Gujarat also it's called Uttarayan. In Assam it's known as Bihu. And here Narendra Bhai is here, and there is kite flying on this day. People take a dip in a lake or a river and worship the sun and that is supposed to bring blessings, remarkable. But flying kites is something very prevalent in Gujarat, and I do not know how many of you have been to Gujarat these days. I would urge you to go there. And if you go on this day, you will see the kind of atmosphere that has been created by Narendra Bhai by organizing a kite flying festival, international. And you would be surprised to know that even across the border in Punjab, in Lahore also, kite flying is done with such vigor that it's almost a frenzy on this day. And therefore, I think that this festival of Pongal or Makar Sankranti or Uttarayan, whatever you call it, it only indicates how strong are the bonds of culture. I have always regarded that here in India, what binds us together is culture, and therefore I describe it as cultural nationalism. And it would be interesting for you to know that there were fanatics in Lahore who these days carried on a campaign against kite flying. They said that it is a Hindu remnant, and therefore this should be banned, this should be stopped, it should be discontinued. Nothing happened there. It continues as before, goes on. And therefore it is that I often feel that the bonds of culture even disregard religious diversities. Religious diversities will remain, and they should remain, nothing wrong about it. But the bonds of culture should be understood, and they should be really respected. My first experience of what is cultural nationalism came in a very curious way. When India got independence, but of course simultaneously came partition of the country, and because of partition, the small population of Hindus in Sindh it became evident that we have to migrate. And migration started because killings had started in other parts of what became Pakistan. And therefore, migration of Hindus started. And those days, there was a proposal to construct a port like Karachi in Kandla in Gujarat. And there were people there, leaders of the Hindu society, who thought that the Hindus might migrate to Kutch in Gujarat. And my father also started thinking in that way. But my grandmother, who was at that time 80 years old, she told my father that I believe that you are thinking of moving to Gujarat, to Kutch. She said, well, you can go and settle wherever you want, but you take cognizance of the fact that I am 80 years old. I do not know how long I will remain. How many more years, 2 years, 3 years, I am to live for more. I do not know. I would be very happy if you can take me for my last few years to Varanasi, to Kashi, so that when my end comes, I am there on the banks of the Ganga. Now, this is something that is prevalent throughout the country. And these are traits which combine the whole country in a way. When I first went to Surat in Gujarat, I was told about the very good food that is there. And a friend told me that here the proverb circulating is Surat no Jiman, Kashi no Maran. And if you want to have good food, have it in Surat. And if you want to go and die somewhere, go and die in Kashi. Now these are traits which are cultural traits. And because of these cultural traits, including like kite flying, but then there are journalists here, there are media men there who know that kite flying has a very curious meaning. And today when they see that here Narendra Bhai and Advani are here at the Tughlaq function in a state ruled by Jayalalitha ji, kite flying will have so many stories circulating. I would not mind that kind of kite flying, even if it is imaginary, because when I was listening to the Tamil speech by Cho and the translation given to me by Guru Murthy, I felt that he had left nothing to imagination. And actually I can say I am today, I happen to be following the happenings in India's parliament very closely. And when I think in terms of the kind of political parties that would associate with us and cooperate with us, we happen to be the principal opposition against the present government. And among the parties that have been continuously cooperating with us, helping us in all respect, it is not merely AIADMK may not be part of the NDA, but the kind of cooperation and assistance we have received from the party under the leadership of Jayalalitha ji has been total. There has been no reservation of any kind, and therefore it is that even in my yatra, my 40 days yatra that I undertook in the month of October and November, when I reached Tamil Nadu and I came to Tamil Nadu, I started from Madurai. It is from Madurai that my Rath went to Thiruvananthapuram, from there to Kerala. And in Madurai, after a short while, I got information that the bridge over which the Rath was to pass, beneath that, a bomb with 7 kg of RDX was kept, and had it not been for the people there, villagers there, who saw it in the morning and reported to an AIADMK office bearer, local, who went and informed the police. And then all necessary steps were taken to remove the bomb and to inform our colleagues and advise us to change this route, go from this place and that place, which was done. And when I rang up the Chief Minister to thank her for what the police had done, she said that it is Providence that has saved you. And the next sentence touched my heart. She said, I would not have been able to forgive myself if anything had happened. And that news appeared very prominently in certain newspapers. And I would today again like to express my deep gratitude to the Chief Minister of Tamil Nadu, her party colleagues, and her police for having averted this kind of incident. Well, that's the end to kite flying. And now let me proceed to the fact that it's not merely this kind of cooperation that makes me feel that Jayalalitha ji, AIADMK have been functioning as natural allies of my party. There are so many things common, but the biggest thing common is that a crucial factor for all state governments and a crucial factor which depends on the conduct of the central government is the question of center-state relations, to which Cho also referred to in his speech, and which is something which those who have been following various judgments in respect of Indian nationalism, in respect of the Indian state, what kind of state is this? What are the characteristics of the Indian constitution? They would know that there have been judgments which say that the Parliament of India can amend any provision of the constitution except those that are basic to India's structure. And what are those basic aspects which are basic and fundamental, which Parliament even by a two-third majority cannot change? One thing is federalism. Federalism is an essential feature of the Indian constitution. And what does federalism mean? It means that the central government cannot override the powers and authority of the state governments. Since the days of Deen Dayal Upadhyay, who was our ideologue in the Jana Sangh, or I would say since the days of Dr. Shyama Prasad Mukherjee, we have believed that India should be a strong country. And the strength of the country lies not only in the central government being strong, but in the state governments also being strong. You cannot have a strong central government with weak state governments. Somehow, those who have ruled the center, because they have ruled for 40-45 years without any check or balance, total hegemony. For nearly 40-45 years, the Congress party ruled not only the center, but even the states, most of the states. And as a result of that, federalism was weakened. But gradually, the state governments came to be governed by non-Congress parties. They lost Tamil Nadu. A bipolar polity developed in Tamil Nadu, but a bipolar polity in which the two poles were the DMK and the AIADMK. The Congress became a third party. Similarly, in several other states, one by one, things started changing. As for example, even in Gujarat today, I feel very proud today that we have a state like Gujarat. And we have a chief minister like Narendra Bhai Modi, who is a model for all, really. And therefore, when the questioner came and asked Cho a question to which he tried to reply in a manner which seemed to be hedging, but the questioner or the lady who put that question was very forthright. But I, for one, feel proud. I remember when it was last year, when at a press conference, a similar question was posed to me and asked me, he said, you are Chief Minister of Gujarat, which you represent in the Lok Sabha. don't you feel that he's becoming bigger than the party? And my answer to that girl was, she was also a girl. She was a lady correspondent. My answer to that correspondent was, I said, we know of every family in which very often the younger show greater talent than the elders. And the elders, they don't think that he has become bigger than the family. He feels proud about it, that a younger member of the family is able to acquit himself in a manner as to make ordinary people think that even his father or his elder brother, he did not have such talent. These are things which makes the whole family proud, even the elders proud. So I could understand Cho's limitation in replying to that answer. But I have no limitation. And I always feel that, in fact, these days, when I have been interacting with members of not only the central government, not only the ministers who beat me, I cannot talk to all of them that frankly, but some of the senior officials in government. I asked a very senior official who happened to be very close to me and intimate with me. I asked him, can you think of any democracy in the world where the number one in that democratic hierarchy is not known to the people? And I asked him, I said, you are such an important man in the whole establishment, in the government. You occupy this particular post, and which is a crucial post. Have you ever interacted with number one in the Indian government, who is no doubt the Congress president, but she is not the Prime Minister, for a period of, say, 1 hour or 45 minutes, in which you are able to understand what is her thinking, what is her attitude to certain problems? He tried to avoid it. He said, I don't have reason to do that. I said, it's not a question of reason. But if such a situation exists, can it be for the good of the country? After all, you have the US president, on whose desk there is a board lying there, the buck stops here. In a democracy, though no prime minister would put a board of that kind, his position is not like that of the US president. This is not a presidential system. It is a prime ministerial system. But in that prime ministerial system also, he is number one. There is no other number one. Certainly not the party president. I remember, I was a journalist at one time before coming to the Indian Parliament, and the first 10 years after independence, I was in Rajasthan. And I recall very well, and I have cited this example at very many places. I said once, from USSR, 2 prominent visitors came to Rajasthan. They must have gone to other parts of the country also, but they came to Rajasthan. The 2 eminent visitors were Mr. Khrushchev and Mr. Bulganin. Mr. Bulganin was the president of the USSR at that time. Mr. Khrushchev was the first secretary of the Communist Party of the USSR. And we as journalists were told very firmly by the government of Rajasthan that in reporting these speeches by the two eminent gentlemen from USSR, precedence has to be given to Khrushchev, not to Bulganin. according to their hierarchy, the communist states hierarchy, it is number one is Khrushchev. Number one is not Bulganin. So it is Khrushchev who is to be reported. Even if you do not say anything about Bulganin, it won't matter. But Khrushchev must be reported fully. That was the first time I understood. It is the second time I have seen something similar is in India these days. And I have said it. I have said it again and again. I said when Cho referred to the fact that the Prime Minister was unhappy that I called him a weak Prime Minister. I said this because of this. I said you don't have to look to 10 Janapath always. 7 RCR is the most important address in New Delhi, so far as the government of India is concerned. Though it's a matter of chance, I may tell you that I might have landed in 10 Janapath. How? Do you know what happened? It's a curious incident in my life. Once VP Singh was the Prime Minister of India. And at that time, the largest party in the opposition was the Congress party. And so the leader of the Congress party, who was none else than Rajiv Gandhi, he was the leader of the opposition at that time. And then we brought down the VP Singh government after what he did to my Rath Yatra. And his government was brought down because we were supporting him. And we had told him that if you do anything to our yatra, your government goes. And it went. And when that government fell, the largest party in the house was naturally the Congress party. And that party decided to support Chandrasekhar as the Prime Minister. Chandrasekhar had perhaps 10 or 12 15 people with him, MPs with him, but the Congress party's support gave him naturally all the necessary strength and support and legitimacy, and so the president had no option but to make him the Prime Minister of India. And when he was made the Prime Minister, the president wanted a clear letter from the Congress party. And Rajiv Gandhi, as leader of the Congress party, wrote a letter to the president that we unconditionally support Sri Chandrasekhar as Prime Minister of India. The moment the Speaker of the House saw that, he read that and immediately called Rajiv Gandhi and told him that the leader of the opposition cannot support the Prime Minister unconditionally. And therefore, I have no choice but to tell you that you cease to be leader of the opposition, and the second party in the house, which is the BJP, its leader, L.K. Advani, would be made leader of the opposition. And so naturally, a bulletin was issued that from tomorrow, L.K. Advani would be leader of the opposition, etc., etc. And I remember this incident quite very well, because the first phone call in the morning, next morning, came from Rajiv Gandhi. Firstly, to congratulate me on becoming leader of the opposition, and secondly, also to say that I have a suggestion to offer to you. You have been living in your flat in Pandara Park for a long time. And I would suggest, why not shift to 10 Janapath? I will find another house for myself. But just as 7 RCR is always the residence of the Prime Minister of India, let 10 Janapath become always the residence of the leader of the opposition in the Lok Sabha. I said, Mr. Gandhi, I'm grateful to you for the compliments that you have given me and also for this suggestion. But I would like to tell you that I have lived in my Pandara Park residence even when I was a cabinet minister in Morarji Bhai's government. And I did not shift from there, I'm used to it. And even now, thanks for the suggestion, but I'm sorry I cannot do it. So that is what I said. I would have landed myself in 10 Janpath. But if I was forced, nevertheless, to shift ultimately from Pandara Park, it was only because the security people who told me that your presence here is fraught with risk and we cannot afford it. I said, what's the problem? I don't feel a risk. You do what you want. Then I found that because of me living in Pandara Park, all the other residents of that area, they were put to all kinds of harassment. You can't park here, you can't go this way, you can't go that way. And so ultimately, when our government came, Vajpayeeji's government, I said, all right, I'll leave this place, give me a place where, and I shifted to my present Prithviraj Road residence. That's how it happened. But this 10 Janapath being more important than 7 Racecourse Road has a long history, which I thought would be in place to mention. Listening to Cho, I felt as acutely conscious of my shortcomings as I have been whenever I have travelled with Vajpayeeji. The first time I travelled with Vajpayee was when I was in Rajasthan. And he came, I was at that time a member of the party's executive. I have had the good fortune of participating in all the Lok Sabha elections from 1952 till 2009. Participating means either as a campaigner or as a candidate, not always as a candidate, because I came to Parliament only in 1970, much later. From 70 till today I have been there, except for 2 years in between when I did not contest. But when I was in Rajasthan, and Vajpayee came to tour Rajasthan, I was asked to accompany him. And during those 5 or 6 days that he was in Rajasthan and I accompanied him, I developed a complex that if this is the kind of political leader people expect, I just cannot be that. He's so brilliant an orator that he can keep thousands of people spellbound by his oratory, by his command on language, by his fluency. And so this complex in me gradually became so strong that when much later in 1973, after Vajpayee had been president of the party for 4 years, he said, now Advani, you have to be president. I said, I can't be president. He said, why? I said, I can't speak. I can't speak in public. He said, you speak in Parliament so well. I said, Parliament is a different matter. Parliament is a different matter. But the speaking in huge gatherings, mass gatherings, and the kind of wit and humor you have, I don't have. I am too prosaic a person. And therefore it is that I say that the wit and humor of Cho. In fact, when Guru Murthy was interpreting him, translating what he was saying, I felt that this audience would like him to continue in Tamil rather than listen to a foreign language like mine. But anyway, these are things which one has to bear sometime. And so I am really happy today. I'm happy that he can pick upon Karunanidhi and give a long word. Every sentence of his seemed to evoke peals of laughter from the audience. Now, I can tell you, nowadays, wit and humor, even in Parliament, has disappeared gradually. Ira is here. He's been in those days. I have been there when I used to hear Pilu Modi or Madhu Dandavate and all of them. And I remember so many incidents of that time, including those incidents which were of the emergency. Would you believe it? Dandavate was with me in the Bangalore Central Jail. Shyamnandan Mishra was also with me. And the first few days, we filed a habeas corpus writ petition in the High Court of Karnataka. And the Chief Justice was furious. He said, what is this? These people had come here for a parliamentary committee meeting, and the Commissioner of Police has arrested them under MISA. The Commissioner of Police may not be knowing even their name properly. And what they have been doing or not doing, how can he be knowing? And what kind of offense have they committed that he should arrest them and put them in the Bangalore Central Jail here? And his comments in those first 2 or 3 days itself made it clear to the government of India that he is going to release them. So immediately there was some hectic thinking in New Delhi. And one day, one fine morning, the superintendent of jail very happily, smilingly came rushing to us, woke us up at about 6:30 in the morning and said that your release orders have come, you have to go. I could not understand. And while one of our colleagues, Shyamnandan Mishra, he said, मैंने तो पहले ही कहा था, ये पार्लियामेंट का सेशन होने वाला होगा, उसके बाद तब छोड़ देगी. मैंने कहा, I don't believe that it is that simple. I don't think so. And anyway, we said, let's go. He says, you are released. So we went out. And the moment we came out of the Bangalore Central Jail prisons, found another jeep standing there. And police came and said, you are under arrest. Come along with us. And they took us to some police station. And from that police station to the airport. And in a plane, IAF plane, all three of us were packed off to Haryana to be lodged in the Rohtak jail. And we reached there at about 1:30 at night. It was raining heavily outside. And inside we were all wet with our wet clothes. And inside when we went, the superintendent of jails had gone away. But the deputy superintendent was there. And that deputy superintendent, he took all our baggage, opened it, threw out all the clothes, started looking at the papers, at the books, everything, whatever we had. And his eyes suddenly spotted that Shyamnandan Mishra, one of us, he was always an MP, his chappal was slightly open at the front. So he took that chappal and opened it still more. Madhu Dandavate, with his sense of humor and wit, he said, it's true that the Prime Minister has said only yesterday that we must search our souls. But that's soul, S-O-U-L, soul. That is not S-O-L-E. So that kind of wit and humor is no longer there. It's only persons like Cho, if they come to Parliament. They would bring in that. Anyway, it's really been a delight being here. And I found, as I said, that we see in the Chief Minister, present Chief Minister of Tamil Nadu, a natural ally in all that we think. And I was scanning through her speech at the National Development Council meeting some days back, in which the Chief Minister said, she commented upon the central government's attitude. The central government was seeking to reduce states into the status of, in quotes, glorified municipal corporations. And then she went on to say that what is expected in a federal government like ours, a federal state like ours, at least the central government must regard the state governments as partners in the governance of the country. But I am not sure, she said, I am quoting Jayalalitha ji again, I am not sure that the government of India recognizes the states as partners, leave alone equal partners, and respects their viewpoints. These meetings at best of the National Democratic Council, Development Council, are ritualistic and are exercises in futility. And she went on to accuse the UPA government of appearing to be, again I quote Jayalalitha ji's words, hell-bent on penalizing non-Congress governments. These are her remarks. I do not have the remarks that Modi ji made there. But I know that my party took cognizance of this fact at its Lucknow meeting of the executive some time back, in which Modi ji himself moved the resolution of the party on how the central government, the UPA government, is undermining this basic character of the Indian Constitution, namely federalism. And it was a powerful indictment of the government of India as to how they are doing it. You would be surprised to know that a very successful conclave took place in Gujarat some days back, some time back, in which many countries of the world participated. And the huge amount of investment they promised to the Gujarat government. What is significant is that the central government asked all the state industries controlled by the central government not to participate in that Gujarat function. And not one single state government participated. Not one single union government industry participated. How can you have an attitude of this kind? I am sure that when you hear Modi himself telling you all that has been happening, it would be an eye-opener for everyone. So far as I am concerned, I have been concerned with the question of governance since 97 particularly. In 1997, I undertook my longest yatra. 59 days I was on the road. And that year was significant because we had completed 50 years of independence, 1997. And my theme was that in 50 years, India should have come to the top. India should have been certainly among the front-ranking countries of the world, if not at the top. But if this has not happened, the reason is simple. The reason is that in 1947, the sacrifice of our patriots of all kinds, patriots like Gandhiji, patriots like Nehruji, patriots like Sardar Patel, and patriots like Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose, who did not agree with Gandhiji, patriots like Sardar Bhagat Singh and Chandrasekhar Azad, who did not agree with Gandhiji and who had their own ways. All their efforts, all their sacrifices, all their martyrdoms, it is this that brought us Swaraj, self-government. But it was expected that those who assume the reins of office and become part of the government, they would convert that Swaraj into Suraj, into good governance. Not only our governance, but good governance. We failed to do that. And it is therefore that even after 50 years, we are still backward. Even after 50 years, we have still such a huge lack of infrastructure, no roads, nothing of the kind, such enormous illiteracy, such bad nutrition for our children. If all this is to change, then the first and foremost requirement is good governance, Suraj. And therefore, from 1997 onwards, every effort of ours, when I say ours, I mean my party as well as the governments where we are part of the government, where we are ruling ourselves or in alliance with others, has been stress on good governance. And I have emphasized again and again in the yatra that I just undertook that good governance and corruption cannot coexist. If there is good governance, it cannot coexist with good governance. So much so that I would go one step further and say that if there is democracy and dynastic succession also cannot coexist. This has to be understood. These are two things go together. And it is, here is Cho. I admire him because I regard him, he's not a member of any party, but I regard him as a one-man crusader for probity and values in public life. One-man crusader for probity and values in public life. And on top of that, what I have already said, I am still to come across a journalist whose command on humor and sarcasm can be used so effectively to put forth even the most serious thoughts, serious views. I am still to come across. And therefore, I have been an unreserved admirer of Cho Ramaswamy. And therefore it is that I feel very happy and delighted to be here amidst you and address you in this gathering. Thank you very much.